Well, hello, I'm Steve Ellis here from Quest Ministries, trying to tackle some of the tough questions that people raise about God and life and the Bible and Christianity. Tough ones that come up all the time. We do that here in a class called I'm Glad You Asked. Thanks for joining us here on the first session. There are certainly a lot of great questions that people raise about the existence of God, about the existence of evil and suffering in the face of God. What about the Bible? Can you trust that today? What about those hypocrites, those crazy people in the church? Don't they invalidate Christianity? And how can anybody be so narrow to say Jesus is the only way? These will be some of the questions we'll tackle in following episodes. But today, we're going to begin with the big question. How do you know that God really exists? How do you make a case for the existence of this deity we've always heard about? Well, there's really three possibilities that people take with that question. Number one, they say, no, I'm an atheist, an atheist, the opposite of theist. I don't believe that there's a God. A middle position would be someone who says, well, maybe there's a God, maybe there's not. I'm an agnostic. I am one that needs more proof. I'm not sure. And then there's a third position. Someone would say, yes, I believe as a theist that there is a God. Let's take a look at all three of these and see which one holds some weight. When someone first says, no, I don't believe that there's a God, I'm an atheist, one of the things that I might do is take a pencil and a piece of paper and draw a big old circle and say, hey, let's let that circle represent all the knowledge in the universe. That's everything that we currently know, all the internet, all the books and all the libraries, and we'd also include all the things yet to be discovered. This is everything. And then I would hand that pencil to my atheist friends and I'd say, well, would you write something inside that circle to represent what you know? And typically it's only a small circle or a dot. When I see that, I say, it seems to me that for someone to conclude there is no God, you would have to possess everything within that circle. You would have to possess all the knowledge to prove there is no God, because there could be some knowledge outside of your knowledge that shows the existence of God. To prove there's no God, you must be all-knowing. You must be omniscient. You, in other words, must be God to prove there is no God. And of course, that's a conclusion that's self-defeating. Another thing I would point out is that the statement that there is no God is what's called an absolute negative. There is absolutely not something. And an absolute negative is impossible to prove. It's like saying, there's no diamonds in Australia. And even though you could spend your lifetime going there and looking everywhere above ground and digging below the ground and make the false conclusion there are no diamonds in Australia, there could have been some on the other part of the continent when you were on the other side. I'd also point out that one would have to consider life without a God. Would there really be any absolute meaning or value or purpose or morality or ethics? I mean, what's the point of life if there is no purposeful creator of the universe? Who's to say that things like murder or rape or stealing are wrong? Who would be able to say that Hitler was wrong? Who would be able to say that ISIS and other extreme Islamic radicals are wrong in killing other people? That's a question that requires a God. What about the middle position? If someone says, well, maybe there's a God, I'm not sure, then the question becomes, what is an acceptable form of proof that would help? And I always seem to offer that form of proof that we use every day in our court system. We call that legal historical proof. You have to render a verdict on the preponderance of credible evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond a shadow of a doubt, but what would a reasonable person conclude given the credible evidence? And then we would consider a subset of that, what we call cause and effect reasoning. When there's an effect, there must have been something that caused it. And that's something we'll employ as we go through this study together. And in this study, we'll be looking at basically three, what I call logical arguments, because it's the cosmological argument. That's the argument from origin. We look at the cosmos. We look at the universe. We'll look at the teleological argument. This is the argument from design, as we'll see. And finally, briefly, we'll look at the anthropological argument, an argument from human personality to see what it tells us about God. Let's begin by looking at what's called the if proposition. The if proposition states that if anything now exists, something must be eternal. Otherwise, something not eternal came from nothing. Well, what does this strange statement mean? Well, in our case, if anything now exists, if there's an effect that we see, namely the universe, something must be eternal. Something must have caused it. In our case, we'll make a case for God. Otherwise, something that's not eternal, the effect which is the universe, and we will make the case that it is not eternal itself, then simply it came from nothing. There was no cause. There was nothing. Now, to get there, let's look at the 4 explanations that exist for the universe itself. And I think you'll find there are only 4. Some would say the universe itself is just an illusion. It's not real. A second idea is the universe emerged from nothing. A third idea is that the universe itself is eternal. And the fourth conclusion would be the one we're going to make a case for, that the universe was created by an eternal force or being. So let's take these one by one and see which one is most reasonable. Certainly the first one, that the universe is an illusion. Some have believed and dreamed that we're just inside some kind of weird existence, but it's not real. But does anybody really live that way? Does anybody fail to look both ways before they cross the street? No, they know the oncoming traffic is real, and therefore they don't live that way. That's a self-defeating proposition. What about the idea that the universe emerged from nothing? Well, again, this goes against our cause and effect reasoning. For every effect, it must have a cause, and you can't simply have a universe that emerged from nothing. The third idea is held by most people who don't believe in God, that the universe itself is eternal. Well, what's wrong with that idea? Well, there seems to be a growing scientific evidence for a start, whether you call that the Big Bang Theory or something else. Most scientists agree today that everything that exists today in our universe at one time was one hot primordial atom compressed together in a moment of time and then exploded outward with great force. There's evidence for a start. Along with that, there's an observable abundance of hydrogen in our universe. Well, what does that mean? Well, hydrogen is the fuel of stars. It's what our stars burn to get light. Our own sun does that. And if the universe was eternally old, all that hydrogen would have been burned up by now. Stars would have gone cold and dark, and we wouldn't even be here. The third problem with the eternal universe is the fact that there's evidence for an end as well. The laws of thermodynamics talk about the type of energy we have today, and that it's going from useful to random. It's going to entropy, where would there be no more useful energy left? And again, everything would have played out if the universe was eternally old, and again, we would not be here. So, if these three things hold, that the universe is not an illusion, the universe did not emerge from nothing, and the universe is not eternal, that leaves us with the final fourth conclusion, that the universe had to be created by something or someone that is spaceless, since there was no space before, timeless, since there was no time before. There was nothing material, so this being had to be immaterial, uncaused, and immensely powerful to bring everything into being, and all those things put together suggest an eternal being, or we would say a God. Now, it doesn't tell us what kind of God that individual would be. Is that God, for example, someone that would be personal or impersonal? We'll tackle those questions in just a moment. But what we've looked at here briefly is the cosmological argument. Now we'll turn our attention to something called the teleological argument. And the teleological argument looks at the design and the fine-tuning of the universe. What does that seem to suggest about where it came from? And when you look at the design and fine-tuning, you'll notice the order and the complexity and the symmetry of our universe. And some would want to argue that all of that which we see in the observations of science is something the product of chance, not design. Well, it seems to me the most reasonable conclusion follows what we would see in an example like I'm going to show you now. If you went to the Grand Canyon, for example, and I asked you where did that come from, you would not believe that a team of sculptors spent thousands of years out there creating those cliffs and beautiful ravines and all that you see in its splendor. You know that that is the the random chance work of environmental processes and a river working its way through there to create the Grand Canyon. But if I took you to another rockside formation up in South Dakota called Mount Rushmore, you would not conclude the same thing. You would not say that weather and erosion created the faces of 4 presidents. You would know that that came by design. Now, that is the case we're making here in the teleological argument. The design and the fine-tuning of the universe, when looked at through various disciplines such as geology and biology, cosmology and astronomy, especially these last two, suggests that we have an immensely complex design that has been fine-tuned over the ages. And with the advancement of our telescopes like the Hubble and other far-reaching instruments, we have discovered more and more of this fine-tuning, more and more of this complexity that we observe in our scientific labs. We've come to the place where we believe our universe is extremely fine-tuned to support human life on Earth, and we also know that if certain highly precise and interdependent conditions were to vary, even in the slightest degree, humanity would cease to exist. Now, these environmental conditions have we come to know as anthropic constants. And we know there's at least 122 of these anthropic constants. These are things like the degree of oxygen or CO2 gas or water vapor in our atmosphere, the rate of the universe's expansion, the sheer fact that we have a constant 23-degree axis tilt of the Earth that keeps us warm and cold. All of these, up to 122 of these anthropic constants, maintain human life. Well, some would say that's all there because of random chance. Somewhere in this vast universe, and some would even postulate a multiverse, there would be one place where all those anthropic constants would work together for the good of creating human race. Is it random chance? Well, noted astrophysicist Hugh Ross has calculated the probability of all these 122 things occurring by chance, no divine design, and that probability is 1 × 10 to the 138th power. I would say highly improbable, not reasonable to conclude. Add to that the work of Arno Penzias, who the noted American physicist, the one who helped discover the background radiation that helped establish the Big Bang Theory, made this startling observation from his work. He says astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which is created out of nothing and delicately balanced to provide the exact conditions required to support life. Now note this, he says, in the absence of an absurdly improbable accident, the observation of modern science seems to suggest an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan, which sounds a whole lot like a God. You see, the teleological argument says that the design and fine-tuning of our universe definitely exists, and it's improbable for this to have occurred by chance. Therefore, there must be an intelligent designer and fine-tuner. So we've briefly looked at the cosmological argument, the teleological argument. Now let's just take a few moments to look at what's called the anthropological argument, the argument from human personality. And basically what this says is that as creatures, we have certain attributes that cannot exceed the Creator. The creature is not above its Creator. So does this tell us something about this designer, creator God? Is he a personal God? Well, look at the personality of man. What do we observe? Man himself has what? Intellect, emotions, will, and certainly other things like an appreciation for aesthetic beauty and morality, and we could go on and on. Well, that would suggest to us that this God, this creator, must also have intellect, emotions, and will, because the creature, namely you and I, cannot exceed that of our creator. He is indeed a very personal God. So what do we see in these three arguments? As we've gone through that, maybe you've been thinking, so what? What do they show? Simply this, that there is a God who has designed all of life and desires a relationship with his creation. If that is true, then life truly has meaning. Life truly has value. Life truly has purpose. And if this is a personal God in nature, then one should consider the good news that's offered in Christianity, that this designer, creator God wants to have a relationship with man. Let me leave you with one last illustration. This is called Blaise Pascal's wager. In the 17th century, Blaise Pascal, a mathematician, philosopher, Renaissance man, believer in God, had a bunch of friends who were gamblers but didn't believe in God. So he thought he would put this question to them in the form of a wager, and this is how it went. It says, you can believe in God, or you can have no belief in God. You can certainly believe in God and be right. You can believe in God and be wrong. And likewise, you can have no belief in God and be right, or you can be wrong. What are the 4 outcomes, he thought, of these 4 scenarios? Well, if you believe in God and you're right, well, certainly you're the big winner. You have gained everything. If you believe in God and you're wrong, have you really lost anything? You probably lived a moral life of high value. But what if you didn't believe in God and you found out you were right? Did you really gain anything? You probably lived a very cynical, dark existence. But what if you didn't believe in God and you're wrong? Well, you're the big loser. You've lost everything. And this is how he would sum it up. He said, belief in God is a wise wager. Granted that faith cannot be proved, what harm will come to you if you gamble on its truth and it proves false? If you gain all. If you lose nothing. Wager then, he said, without hesitation, that he, God, exists. I would sum it up kind of this way. To believe in God is to risk nothing, but to potentially gain everything. You know, as we've been through these 3 arguments, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and the anthropological argument, I hope you can see that the reasonable conclusion, the most likely conclusion one makes, is that indeed, God, he does exist. Thanks for listening. Come back and we'll do a few more questions in future sessions. Hope to see you then. Goodbye.